Superman, Last Son of Krypton by Elliot S. Maughan. Chapter 17, The Sociologist. After Superman had left Luthor in prison in Pocantico, Clark made one more appearance in Studio B so that he could be roped firmly into his bet with Steve Lombard, and in Lois Lane's office so that he could make a lunch date for the following afternoon. Superman was busier. Clark was walking down the sixth-floor hallway with Jimmy Olsen toward the elevator, and he accepted the offer of a ride to his apartment in Jimmy's new TR-7. In a moment, Clark's time sync changed, as it occasionally did. "Listen, Jimmy, let me take a rain check on that ride home. I think I'll walk." "Yeah, sure, Clark. Watch out for the wall. Hey, where are you running? You sure are in a hurry to take a leisurely stroll uptown." By now Jimmy was talking to himself. Less than a minute later, a whistling filled the air over an uncommonly choppy Lake Superior, and crew members near panic on a threatened cargo ship looked up into the sky. Then all 52 of them fell flat to the deck, holding on to their shifting centers of gravity as the big ship was lifted 40 feet into the air and flown to port. On the way back to Metropolis, Superman spotted an ambulance with its siren whirring and red light spinning, stranded immobile in the middle lane of Route 80s between Totowa and Fairfield, New Jersey. He lifted this stranded ship out of dead calm seas and delivered it to the hospital, whose name was on the side. The coronary patient inside was spared the experience of unconsciousness, although an intern taking his electrocardiogram fainted. In Hillside, a cat was stuck in a tree, and her owner was too big to crawl on the branch after her, and too small not to cry. At the instant Superman heard the cat yowl, the wrist of the young woman on Green Street in Metropolis was grabbed by a man who had been waiting in one of the stranded dark alleys, peppering the neighborhood. "Hey, man, what are you doing?" the girl squeaked. "Come in here, you." A beam of heat vision snapped the branch of the tree, and the cat fell. "Get your hand off me, or what? What you got there, girlie?" She calmed down and found her misplaced equilibrium. "Listen, man, why don't you buy me a drink and do it right?" A thin stream of super breath from above bounced off the concrete and softened the kitten's four-legged landing. "I mean, why do you want to force yourself on a girl like that? Hey, I don't bite, do you?" "Look, don't go trying to snow me, girlie," he snarled, but his grip on her arm loosened just a little, and a blinding streak of red and blue from out of the sky left an indentation on his jaw. In a moment, a bewildered patrolman was dropped out of the sky, and the girl gave the cop her account of the incident. The man woke up in a jail cell. Here are some other things Superman did the night before the full moon. He melted, confiscated, and otherwise neutralized a collection of knives, chains, and shoddily assembled handguns carried around by a group of 12 teenage boys roaming through Metropolis Commons. He spun a water current, diverting a school of sharks from which were about to attack some tuna congregated around a lifeline of a research bath escape. There was every possibility that the sharks would accidentally have severed the line. With the super pressure of his hands, he fused shut a hairline crack that was forming in one of the pontoons underneath Oceana, the experimental floating city 250 miles east of Montauk, Long Island. He slammed through a half-ton of heroin being loaded onto a ship in Le Havre in 4 boxes marked toys. He spotted a train in Northern Ireland about to tumble into a canyon through a bridge weakened by saboteurs. He substituted his own body for the weakened portion of the rail. And when the train was gone, he built a new rail from iron ore and coal he found in nearby deposits. In northern Greenland, he lifted a dog sled, 1,000 huskies, a young doctor, and a supply of vital flu serum over an avalanche to a secluded military outpost in the Davis Strait. Superman spent most of the rest of the night at his Fortress of Solitude, carved out of a mountain 130 miles south of the geographic North Pole. There was a gold-colored airline marker pointing the way to the pole, but if one saw the arrow from the bottom, which is something no one but Superman ever did, it became apparent that this was the 30-ton key to a door camouflaged by the consistent inclement weather and the indented face of the mountain. In the fortress, the Man of Steel checked bacterial cultures with which he experimented. He was no medical genius, but he did, after all, have immediate total recall, and he was the only being of whom he knew who could safely handle Regulus 243, the Regulus 243 strain, which caused a violent chemical reaction in organic matter, turning it, on contact, into particles of a saline crystal. Superman occasionally wondered if the only recorded instance of Regulus 243 contamination on Earth was the death of Lot's wife during the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Superman fed and groomed the fearsome menagerie of domesticated extraterrestrial creatures he kept and studied in one of the lowest levels of the fortress. He wrote an entry in the Kryptonese language in his personal journal. He painted a landscape in acrylics. He favored the vistas of Jupiter and its moons. But this was a Martian plane, while he listened to a recording of the sonic flare patterns as performed by a musician of Polaris 4. He slept for half an hour, which was something he did because he needed a certain amount of dreaming to maintain a psychological balance. Then he took off straight up to plunge through the molten crust of the sun, 93 million miles away, in order to sterilize himself. It would be bad form, after all, to carry any Regulus 243 cells back to Metropolis. It was a bit under 17 minutes of the sun, and traveling back at the speed of light, which was the fastest he could travel through real three-dimensional space. He looked down as dawn hit Metropolis. Morgan Edge was sprawled on the fold-out couch in his office. For a multimillionaire, he certainly didn't allow himself much recreation. Jimmy was just arriving home after a long night of rigorous leisure. Steve Lombard was not at home, and Superman could not begin to wonder about where he might be. Lois had been awake for at least an hour. It had to have taken at least that long to get from her apartment to the subway car on which Superman found her. She was up to something. Superman kept a telescopic X-ray eye on the lady as he landed on the roof of the apartment building at 344 Clinton Street. He scanned the sky for planes overhead. Once a Soviet satellite 103 miles up took a picture as he was changing to Clark Kent. The crew of technicians wasted a week before the Russians decided it wasn't worth the effort to find out how the film could be overexposed in the void of space. As Clark Kent walked down the roof stairway to the 33rd floor landing, Lois's train was pulling into the old World's Fairgrounds, the last stop on that line. As she stepped off the train, he stepped into the elevator and pushed the button for the third floor. As he stepped off the elevator, she walked down the stairway toward the subway graveyard, where hundreds of inanimate subway cars lay in wait for rush hour or the scrap heap, vulnerable to the intricate expression of graffiti artists armed with spray paint. Clark Kent walked down the third floor corridor and unlocked the door of apartment 3D. Twisting his neck in the opposite direction all the way, he stepped inside, closed the door behind him, loosened his tie, opened his shirt, dropped his jacket and glasses on a chair, and put 2 eggs up to boil. Lois Lane squeezed through a rip in the hurricane fence and counted the rows of subway cars. She tried to remember which car her source had told her to check. It was too hot a piece of information to write down. She found the 7th row and counted 16 cars in the direction away from the fairgrounds. She crept between the ranks of cars to her target and pulled a stethoscope from her purse. She lifted it to her ears and listened to the hull of the train. Clark picked at his eggs and buttered toast. Breakfast was a habit from his school days. He sat in his living room, reclining chair, as he peered across town. Lois, surely enough, heard voices inside the subway car. Although she could make out only snatches of the conversation, she heard things like, "Last night's shipment, backfire as soon as shoot, street value, $60 a piece, move them by noon tomorrow, every high school in the city." Clark Kent looked through the wall of the subway cars and found 3 men standing over 2 crates filled with cheaply manufactured handguns. He counted 288 pistols in the crates. A tall man in a 3-piece suit was handing an attaché case filled with cash to another man in a uniform of a subway signalman. Lois Lane had heard enough. She stuffed the stethoscope into her shoulder bag and tripped backward over a pile of discarded spray paint cans. She froze at the noise, crawled under the subway car, and waited there for a few minutes. They hadn't heard her, or thought anything of it if they had. She pulled herself, more warily now, out from under the train and made her way back toward her rip in the fence. Clark Kent was no longer in the apartment. First, Lois would call Inspector Henderson. Bill was one cop who understood the concept of privileged information, and he knew how to keep a story quiet until it was revealed to the world by a deserving reporter. Then she would call the Daily Planet City desk and tell them to leave a good-sized hole in the upper left corner of page 1. Then she would call WGBS and have someone drive out here to the backwoods of a city with a change of clothes and a portable typewriter. Then a hand grabbed her around the throat and threw her to the ground. The two men stood over Lois with guns pointed at her face. These would be real guns, not the explosive tinker toys they were planning to sell to the children of Metropolis. "All right, what do you know, lady?" No answer. "Don't I know you?" the other one said. Silence. "Who told you where we'd be? You a cop?" "Hey, she's no cop. She's a reporter." A hint of mortal fear in his face. "How do you know?" "I recognize her. Hey, we better get out of here." "Are you nuts?" "Frisk her." "Not me. That broad's got her own portable bodyguard." "You're talking crazy. If you won't frisk her, The man's pistol drooped like a wilting plant. The molten steel that used to be part of the stock left third-degree burns on his hand. He dropped to the ground, screaming until he fell unconscious. The other man tore off in the direction of the hole in the fence. 20 feet before he got there, he ran into a colorful, immovable object and crumpled. "Miss Lane, do you come here often?" Superman asked. She thought to say that she could have gotten out of this fix herself, that she'd left a sealed envelope in Perry's office, and that it would be opened if she wasn't at the office by 10. But maybe Superman was a little rough on these two. That it would have been nice to deserve credit for mashing a mass sale of Saturday night specials herself. But there he was, standing there, smiling. "You've got to live until at least noon, Lois. I doubt Clark could handle that highbrow social theorist on his own." He glowed with life and power, and sometimes he twinkled under the sun. He was a fallen star, she thought that all the time, but of course she couldn't say it. The phrase would be out of character. What she could do was hug him so hard he might feel the pressure, and maybe he would kiss her. And we'll pause there.